Good morning, children. How are you all? Hope you all are doing well. Welcome to your English class. Children, in our previous session, we had discussed chapter number 13, Too Dear by Leo Tolstoy. Now, today is second session of the same lesson. We are going to continue the discussion of chapter 13, Too Dear. Now, before we proceed further, let's have a quick recap of what we learned in the previous session. In the previous session, we had learned about the introduction of the lesson about the king of Monaco, the kingdom, and the other details. Let's go through it quickly. Near the borders of France and Italy, on the shore of Mediterranean Sea, there was a tiny little kingdom, and it was called Monaco. Okay, and the two bordering countries were France and Italy, right? And it was a very small country, and it was so small that many cities of large countries were bigger than it. The population was about 7,000 people. So it was smaller than our own town also. There were approximately 7,000 people living in that country, and if the land of the kingdom is divided, then each inhabitant, each person living in that kingdom would not get more than an acre of land. It was so small. The land of the kingdom was so small. So, here in this lesson, the author has called it a toy kingdom because it was a very small kingdom. So, he has called it a toy kingdom, and the king of this kingdom has been called a kinglet. Okay, a baby king, because it was a toy kingdom, smaller in size, right? But still, though the kingdom was small and the king was a kinglet, but still he had a proper palace. There were courtiers, there were ministers, bishop, general, and even an army in that kingdom. Okay, though it was not a very large army, only there were 60 men in the army, but still it had an army. And this kingdom levied all the taxes like the other normal kingdoms do. So it was a normal kingdom, though it was tiny in size. Now it happened that few years ago a murder was committed in this kingdom, and the people of this kingdom were very peace loving people, but still a murder was committed, and such a thing had never happened before. So now it was time to take judgment about this act. So the judges were assembled. Now no such act has ever taken place earlier. So there was a ceremony kind of thing, and with the proper ceremony, pomp and show, the judges assembled, and then the trial for the case began. Okay, in the most judicial manner, because this was not an everyday thing there. So it was done in a proper manner. There were judges, there were prosecutors, there were jurymen, there were barristers. All of them argued and judged, and there was a lot of brainstorming on this case. Finally, it was decided that they would cut off the head of the criminal as the law directs. They did not appreciate the criminal at all. They all condemned him, and they decided that his head needs to be cut off because that is what the law directs. So till here everything was good, so far so good, because they were obeying the law, whatever is given in the law. As per that they gave their judgment, right? Now this sentence of death was submitted to the king, their decision. So king read the sentence and he confirmed it. He said that if the law says that this fellow must be executed, right, so we have to execute him. We should follow the law. Now in this whole matter there was only one hitch, one problem. And what was there? The problem was there was neither guillotine for cutting heads off nor an executioner. Now see, we know that this was a very tiny kingdom. So in this kingdom they neither had their own guillotine to cut off the heads nor an executioner who is an expert in doing this. So the ministers again considered the matter, and then they thought that they will address an inquiry to the neighboring government, that is the French government. They'll ask the French government if they could lend them a machine, that is a guillotine, and an expert to cut off the criminal's head. And if the French government would lend them the machine and an expert, what would the cost be? So a letter was sent to the French government. And a week later the reply came that the man an expert, that is an expert as well as the machine, that would be supplied by the French government, and the cost would be 16,000 francs. Now this offer was laid before the king. He thought it over. Said 16,000 francs. This criminal is not worth this money. We should not spend this much money on the criminal. Find some cheap way. Because 16,000 francs, spending such a huge amount on this criminal would mean that the people of that kingdom will have to pay 2 francs extra as a tax. And why should people bear this expense, right? And people will not tolerate this, and it may cause a riot. It may cause a disturbance in the kingdom. So he said, no, this is a huge amount and we are not going to do this. We need to find out some cheaper way in which this matter can be solved, or this execution can be done. Now we proceed further. Till here we had discussed yesterday in our previous video. Now we'll discuss further. So a council was called to consider what could be done. Now after the French government made their offer of 16,000 francs and the king found it too expensive, again the council was called, and they again discussed and considered that how this matter can be solved, how the execution can be made cheaper. So they decided that they would send a similar inquiry to the king of Italy. Now Italy was the other neighbor, right? We remember that the kingdom of Monaco was on the border of France and Italy. So they sent a similar inquiry to the king of Italy. The Italian government wrote that they would have pleasure in supplying both a machine and an expert, and the whole cost would be 12,000 francs including traveling expenses. So, when this inquiry for the man and the machine was made to the Italian government wrote that it would be pleasure for them to supply both machine as well an expert to operate this machine, and the whole cost of doing so would be 12,000 francs, and this would include the traveling expenses also of man and the machine. This was cheaper, but still it seemed too much. It would still mean nearly 2 francs per head on the taxes. Another council was called. They discussed and considered how it could be done with less expense. Could not one of the soldiers perhaps be got to do it in a rough and homely fashion? Now, when the Italian government quoted 12,000 francs for the man and machine, it was cheaper. It was cheaper than what French government had asked, but still they seemed to be too much. The Monaco king, he felt that the amount was still too much, right? It would still mean nearly 2 francs more per head on the taxes, a little less than 2 francs, but approximately it came to 2 francs per head on the taxes, and he was worried about the people. He knew that his people won't tolerate it and it may cause a disturbance in his kingdom. So now another council was called. And what did this council do? They discussed and again considered the matter. A lot of discussion and deliberation was done on the matter. How it could be done with less expense. That was the biggest question for them. This murderer needs to be executed, but how it can be done with minimum expenses so that people would accept it. Could not one of the soldiers perhaps be got to do it in a rough and homely fashion? Right? Now, it was during this deliberation and discussion between the council, they thought that this person has to be executed only, right? They just have to cut off his head. So they have an army of 60 men. So is it not possible that one of the soldiers would do it in a rough or homely fashion, not like an expert, but in a rough manner? Just they have to get rid of his head, chop off his head. So can't it be done in a rough and homely fashion by our own soldier only? The general of the army was called. So the general was called and was asked, "Can't you find us a soldier who would cut the man's head off?" In war, they don't mind killing people. In fact, that is what they are trained for. So the general talked it over the soldiers to see whether one of them would not undertake the job, but none of the soldiers would do it. "No," they said, "we don't know how to do it. It is not the thing we have been taught." Right? So the general of the army, their own army, the army of Monaco, was called and he was asked, "Can't you find us a soldier who would cut the man's head off? Now, in our army of 60 men, isn't there a single soldier who can cut the man's head off? It's merely cutting his head off, right? And in war, they don't mind killing people. They are normally doing so. So, in fact, they are trained to do so, right? To kill the people during war. So, cutting a man's head off should not be a big problem for them. So, why don't you find out a soldier for us, right? The council felt that our soldier only would do that. Why do we need to spend so much? So, the army general was briefed about it. The general talked to his soldiers, and he wanted to find out one soldier at least who would undertake this job and cut off the man's head. But none of the soldiers was ready to do that, right? The soldiers, they said that no, we don't know how to do it, right? And it is not the thing we have been taught. See, killing people during the war is another thing, right? But cutting off somebody's head, executing him, is a different thing. So the soldiers refused. None of them came forward to take up this job. They said, no, we have not been taught such thing during our training, so we cannot do it. It is not possible for us to cut off a man's head, so we won't be able to do it. What was to be done? Again, the ministers considered and reconsidered. They assembled a commission and a committee and a subcommittee, and at last they decided that the best thing would be to alter the death sentence to one of imprisonment for life. This would enable the king to show his mercy, and it would come cheaper. Right? So, finally, it was decided. Now, when the soldier refused to cut off the head of the culprit, so again there was a big question: what was to be done? Right? Again, the ministers considered and reconsidered, but they were not able to find any solution, and the solutions were very expensive. So they assembled a commission to discuss and deliberate over it. They formed a committee and subcommittee. Lot of discussion, deliberation was done, and at last they decided that the best thing would be to alter the death sentence to one of imprisonment for life. They talked to the king, and they said that the best thing would be to change the alter means to change the death sentence to one of imprisonment for life. That is, this culprit, he should not be given death sentence, but it should be changed to lifetime imprisonment. If he is given life imprisonment, what will happen? This would enable the king to show his mercy, and it would come cheaper, right? Now this will, what it will show, that king had been very merciful, and he has changed the sentence, the death sentence of the culprit to the life imprisonment. That is, his life has not been taken. The king has spared his life. Now he'll be in prison for whole life, but at least he'll be alive. The death sentence has been reduced to life imprisonment, and this will become cheaper also for them, and at the same time it would also be a chance for the king to show his mercy. Right? The king agreed to this, and so the matter was arranged. The only hitch now was that there was no suitable prison for a man sentenced for life. There was a small lockup where people were sometimes kept temporarily, but there was no strong prison fit for permanent use. However, they managed to find a place that would do, and they put the young fellow there and placed a guard over him. The guard had to watch the criminal and had also to fetch his food from the palace kitchen. Now, when the councils and the committees and subcommittees, they all finally discussed that his death sentence would be reduced to life imprisonment, king agreed to this. He was happy and he felt that this was cheaper also. So the matter was arranged. It was finally decided that this person will not be given death sentence, but he will be in prison for all his life. Now again there was a problem. The only hitch now was there was no suitable prison for a man sentenced for life. Right? Because in this kingdom never such thing had occurred earlier. Right? So that's why there was no suitable prison for a man who is sentenced for life. But there was a small lockup where people were sometimes kept temporarily. Okay, for minor petty issues, they were sometimes put up into the lockup. So there was a small lockup. But there was no strong prison fit for permanent use. Because this man is going to be there for lifetime, so there has to be a very strong prison. But there wasn't anything like this available in the kingdom of Monaco. So, how to do it? There was again a problem. However, they managed to find a place that would do, and they put the young fellow there. Finally, yes, there wasn't a strong prison, but they could find a place that could serve the purpose. Okay, so they managed with that, and they put the young fellow into that prison, into that place, right? And then a guard was placed over him. Now, since he was a murderer, so a guard is also required. So, in that place, they put the young fellow and also a guard over him. Now, what was the job of the guard? The guard had to watch the criminal that he doesn't run away. So, he has to keep an eye on the criminal and also to fetch his food from the palace kitchen. Now, these were the two things the guard had to do: watch the criminal and to get his food from the palace kitchen. So now the things were looking pretty good. So far, so good. Death sentence was reduced to life imprisonment, and though there was not a proper strong prison which is used for lifetime prisoners, but still they could find a place. So they managed to lock him there and placed a guard so that he doesn't run away from there, and the food was served from the palace kitchen. So this is how they all managed to do it. Now things were looking very fine that all the problems have been solved. But were the problems really solved? That we will discuss in our next session. Okay? It looks like the things are very fine at present. There is no hitch. Everything is looking good, right? The matter has been solved. The murderer has been punished. He has been given life imprisonment, and everything is settled. But is it really settled? Are all the problems solved or not? That we are going to continue in our next session. So that's all for today's session. Children, take very good care of yourselves. Have a nice day. Bye bye. See you soon in our next session.